You're gonna be alright now. I'm here.
It hurts so bad.
The Montana night was heavy with the scent of rain and earth, the kind of air that clung to your skin and made the world feel still. The storm had rolled through fast and fierce, leaving behind puddles that shimmered under a pale moon. In the quiet that followed, only the low croak of frogs and the creak of wet wood filled the air. Lily Hart gripped her lantern a little tighter as she made her way across the Dalton Trail toward the Callahan Ranch. Her boots squelched in the mud, and her shawl, damp from the rain, clung to her shoulders. She hadn't meant to come this late, but the trail had washed out, and turning back wasn't an option. Besides, she told herself, she wasn't going to stay long, just long enough to return the saddle she'd borrowed weeks ago. The house came into view first, a big, weather-worn ranch home with smoke rising from its chimney and golden light glowing faintly through the windows. The kind of sight that used to feel like safety once upon a time. Her chest tightened. It had been 5 years since she'd last seen Sam Callahan. 5 years since she'd walked away from the man who'd loved her, the ranch they'd both grown up on, and the promise of a life she hadn't been ready to accept. She'd told herself she was doing the right thing, chasing opportunity, freedom, the life she thought she wanted. But somehow, she'd ended up right back here, standing in the mud, clutching a lantern, and praying the man inside would take pity on her for one more night. The front door opened before she could even knock. Lily. His voice hit her first. Low, steady, and familiar enough to undo the breath she'd been holding. Sam stood framed in the doorway, the light spilling over him in soft gold. His dark hair was still damp from the rain, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar and sleeves rolled high. He looked older, sharper around the edges, but still unmistakably the same man. The same broad shoulders, the same quiet strength in the way he carried himself. Sam, she managed, her voice barely more than a whisper. He didn't smile, but his gaze held her, steady and unreadable. You're soaked. I just came to drop this off, she said quickly, holding up the saddle. Didn't mean to bother you. He stepped forward, taking it from her hands before she could protest. His touch was brief, but it sent a shiver through her all the same. You didn't bother me, he said. But you shouldn't be walking out here this late. The trail's a mess after that storm. I'll be fine. You'll be lucky if your horse doesn't throw a shoe before you reach the ridge. He glanced toward the barn. You can stay the night. I can't. Can't, he repeated quietly. Won't. Lily looked away, unable to meet his eyes. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still bruised with clouds, and the air hummed faintly with leftover thunder. She should have said no. Should have turned back, even if it meant sleeping under the stars. But standing there, shivering in the cold, watching the faint rise and fall of his chest in the doorway, it was impossible to move. I'll stay, she said finally, barely audible. He nodded once. Good. He turned and motioned her inside. The warmth of the house hit her instantly, the smell of firewood and leather, the faint creak of the floorboards she remembered too well. She set her lantern down on the table and hesitated, suddenly unsure what to do with her hands. Sam hung his hat on the wall and looked back at her. You want something warm. Coffee. She shook her head. I don't want to trouble you. He gave a faint, dry smile. You already did. Might as well let me finish the job. It was the first trace of humor she'd heard from him all night, and it eased something tight in her chest. But then he moved closer, and the tension returned tenfold. Her foot slipped slightly on the wet floor, and before she could steady herself, his hand shot out, catching her by the arm. His grip was firm, grounding. She felt the rough calluses of his palm, the faint tremor beneath the restraint. Careful, he murmured, his voice so low it barely reached above the crackle of the fire. I'm fine, she whispered, though her heart was anything but. He didn't let go right away, his thumb brushing lightly against the inside of her wrist, a touch so gentle it made her dizzy. Then, as if realizing it himself, he loosened his hold. That hand, she said quietly, trying to steady her breathing. Gently, please. He froze. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the room seemed to narrow around them, shrinking until there was only the sound of rain dripping from the eaves and the faint thud of her pulse in her ears. Sam finally stepped back, his jaw tightening. Old habits, he said softly. She swallowed hard. I didn't mean. I know. He turned toward the fire, his back to her now, the light flickering across the planes of his shoulders. The silence stretched, heavy but not hostile, more like the kind that fills the space between two people who once knew how to speak without words. You can take the room at the end of the hall, he said finally. Towels are in the chest by the stairs. Lily nodded, her throat too tight for words. She started toward the hallway, pausing just long enough to look back. He was still standing there, staring into the fire, his expression hidden. But his hand, the one that had caught hers, was still half raised, as if remembering the feel of her skin. She turned away before the tears could come. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, soft and low, like a secret trying to find its voice. And as Lily climbed the stairs, she knew that something in the air had shifted. Something small, fragile, and dangerous had stirred back to life. That hand, that voice, that night. It was all starting again. The next morning came with the smell of rain-soaked pine and coffee brewing in the kitchen. A thin veil of fog hung over the fields, softening the edges of everything it touched. The corral, the barn, even the old oak that leaned over the pasture like it was still listening to yesterday's storm. Lily stood by the window of the guest room, pulling the shawl tighter around her shoulders. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Sam's voice again. Low, steady, and too close. She felt his hand catching hers, that quiet moment between them when time had seemed to stop. She told herself it didn't mean anything. It couldn't. But deep down, she knew it did. Downstairs, she could hear him moving around, boots on the floorboards, the faint clatter of a cup being set down too hard. He was always like that in the mornings. Steady, practical. But now, every sound felt charged, every silence heavy with what hadn't been said. When she finally came down, he was at the stove, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. The fire was low but steady, the light spilling in through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes in gold. Morning, he said, without turning. Morning, she replied softly. He handed her a cup, their fingers brushing briefly. It's not much, he said, but it's hot. She smiled faintly. It's perfect. They stood there for a while, drinking in silence. The tension between them wasn't sharp anymore, just quiet, thick, and familiar. Like a ghost that had never left. Finally, she set her cup down. I didn't mean to stay the night, she said. Didn't plan on it. Sam leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. You don't owe me an explanation, Lily. She hesitated. You know why I left, don't you? His gaze lifted to meet hers, steady and unreadable. I used to think I did. I was scared, she said, the words coming faster now. Of staying. Of being stuck. My father wanted me to take over the store, settle down. Everyone kept saying I'd end up here, with you, raising kids and milking cows, and I panicked. I wanted to see what else was out there. And did you? His tone wasn't cruel, just quiet. She nodded. I did. But I also saw what it's like to be alone. He looked away, jaw tightening. You made your choice. I know. She stepped closer. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I didn't expect to find you the same. The same. Still here. Still kind. That earned the faintest hint of a smile. I don't know about kind. But I never learned how to stop caring. Lily's breath caught. There it was, the truth she'd been afraid to face, wrapped up in a single sentence. Outside, a horse neighed from the barn, breaking the silence. Sam set his mug down and grabbed his hat. Fence out back broke in the storm. Need to fix it before the cattle wander off. I'll help, she said quickly. You don't have to. I want to. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. All right. Just stay close. They spent the next hour in the field, working side by side under the slow-breaking sun. The fog lifted, revealing rolling hills glistening with dew. The air smelled clean, new. Sam drove stakes into the earth, his movements practiced and sure. Lily handed him wire, her fingers brushing his each time, that same quiet electricity sparking between them again and again. When one of the wires snapped back, she flinched, losing her balance slightly. Sam caught her by the arm, just like before. That hand, she whispered, a small, trembling smile forming despite herself. He held her steady, eyes locked on hers. Gently, he murmured, echoing her words from the night before. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The wind stilled, the birds quieted, and all that existed was the warmth of his hand around hers, not rough, not uncertain, just real. She didn't pull away. Lily, he said finally, his voice low and steady. If you're gonna leave again, do it now. Before I start hoping. Her eyes shimmered, tears threatening but refusing to fall. I came back because I already did. He searched her face for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe her. Then, slowly, he let out a breath and brushed his thumb across her knuckles, that same gentle touch that had once broken her heart and was now stitching it back together. The sun broke through the clouds just then, warm and golden, spilling over them both like an unspoken promise. That night, everything between them had changed, quietly, without fireworks or grand words. Just a look, a touch, and the soft, simple truth that some things, no matter how long you run, find their way back home.